let's look at some actual code. In Slack, there's a channel called Session 2 Afternoon. That is where I will share links and code snippets and stuff in class. If you're not on Slack yet, don't worry about it just yet. This isn't that important. But I am putting a link in there to CodePen. CodePen is kind of an online playground for doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript stuff, fiddling around with front-end code. And since I have a pro account, I can do something called Professor Mode, where you can actually follow along with what I type on your own screen. You can copy and paste out of it and scroll to a different part if the part that you're wanting to look at isn't on my screen. But if you don't have the link, it's not a big deal. You can still look at it up here. I'm not going to use CSS in this example, so I'm going to hide that. But let's do some HTML and JavaScript. On CodePen, you don't actually have to put HTML head and body and that stuff. You just start making the body. So let's put something on the page. Let's put a button. Yeah. What is that I just made? And I don't mean button. What do you call that thing? What do you call this angle bracket mess? A tag. Yes, indeed. In fact, it's two tags. An opening tag and a closing tag. Together, this whole thing is called what? Say again? An element. Yes, indeed. So this is an HTML element. What kind of element? A button type element. It is made up of an opening tag and a closing tag and whatever you put in between. So let's say click me. So what's click me? We have an opening tag, a closing tag, and then we have the contents of the element. The whole thing's an element. The stuff between the opening and closing tag are the contents, or the content. Very good. Now this button doesn't do a dang thing, does it? It'd be cool if it did. Click. Nothing. So we could just write some JavaScript to make stuff happen when the page first loads, but when things get really interesting, and what we'll mostly be doing is making stuff happen when something else happens. In other words, when one thing happens, do something else. So we need to tell it what event we're waiting for and what to do when that event occurs. So when the page first loads, we're not actually going to take any action, but we are going to tell JavaScript, hey, start listening for this event to occur, and when it does, do this other thing. So that's a lot of what we'll be doing in this class. How do we do it? Anybody know? Well, first, to bake an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. Before we can do something with that button, we need to have the button. How do I get the button in JavaScript? How do I grab that button off the page and save it to a variable? Anybody happen to know? We could give it an ID or something. Wouldn't have to, but we could. Suppose we did, then what? So I should probably just be able to say, get the ID, please. JavaScript. I take back all those mean things I said about you. Oh, man, I got an error. What do you mean, get the ID? I heard several things. What'd you say? Yeah. Yeah, no, you're saying the right thing. What you said combined with what someone's back there said. What'd you say? Who said? Say it again. Get element by ID. Is that what we're saying? So give the button an ID, like the button or something. Then I could say document. What's this document business? That is how we access the DOM, which is what we're dealing with. The DOM document object model. That is how the page is actually represented inside your browser. It's not the HTML anymore. When your page first loads, it parses the HTML and builds the DOM out of that. It builds this nice tree structure of the entire document, and that's what we're manipulating. To get to the DOM, we go through this document object that is always there. Document.getElementById is one of the many methods built in that can grab pages out of the DOM, or grab elements out of the DOM. So we could just say getElementById, the button. We could, but I don't want to. What's another way I can get things off the page? Anybody know? No, not jQuery. Well, I mean, yes, but no. We're using vanilla JavaScript here, folks. No libraries, none of that $sign business. But tell me how that works. When you have the $sign, what do you do? It's not quite just your ID, though. It looks a little different. It's not just the button. Because jQuery uses CSS selector syntax. You know what selectors are? Anybody know what selectors are? In a CSS rule, you have a selector followed by curly braces and then a bunch of properties and values. That selector tells it which elements on the page the rule applies to. And we can use that same syntax to identify pages to manipulate them, identify elements to manipulate them with JavaScript. Using a method called query selector. There's query selector to find the first match, and there's query selector all to find all matches, everything that matches the selector you give it. And it'll return it in an array-like structure that's technically called a node list, but it's very array-like. You can use square brackets and stuff like that. Query selector and query selector all. But for that, we can't just put the ID. This thing can grab things by class name. It can grab it by ID. It can grab it by just the element name. It can grab it by attributes on it. It can use any kind of syntax that we have in CSS selectors. You know how you target an ID with CSS? Anybody know? You put a little symbol before the ID. Hash, that's right. So that's a CSS selector. Hash, the button, would grab it by ID. What if it didn't have an ID? What if it had a class instead? That's right. Dot. Dot button thingy. What if we had neither one? What if all we knew about the darn thing were that it's a button? How do you target an element just based on tag name using CSS? Yeah. Just say button. Just say button. Totally works. So if I have a choice, if I have a selector that will get me the element without adding a class or ID, basically I don't want to change the markup if I don't have to. So I'm not going to add a class or ID at this time. And I can grab the button that way. And then I hope, save it to a variable. What keyword do I use to create a variable in JavaScript? No. It is no. No button equals document.querySelector button. Okay, there is var. That's the old days. That's pre-ES6. ES6 introduced 2 new keywords for declaring variables, and they work a little differently. And we are using ES6 in here, so what do we use instead? Const, I hear. So there's new. There's let. There's 2 new ones. There's let and there's const. So before we deal with the difference between those and var, let's deal with the difference between let and const. Const doesn't exactly create constants. The difference between const and let is that you cannot reassign things that you declare with const, but you can change them. Suppose you have an array that you created with const. You can still push new items onto the array. You can still run methods on the array that change the contents of the array. You can manipulate the array all you want, but what you can't do is ever again say that variable equals something else. With const, you can never reassign it with an equal sign. With let, you can. So as a general rule, use const unless you know you need let, because you can prevent a lot of errors that way. If you find out that you need to reassign it, use let or change the design of your program. But sometimes it's kind of unavoidable. If, for example, you have a for loop and you need to keep reassigning I, right? That's going to change every time through the loop. You have to use let for that. In fact, that's probably the first time we'll run into this. Yeah. Let and const are both better than var, and we're going to see why here in a minute. Do you happen to know? Okay. It has to do with variable scope, and we'll demonstrate that in a few. So for right now, use let and const instead of var. They are better. Basically, they work a lot more like you expect programming languages to work. There were some kind of strange decisions made really early on. And you can't change the way it works. They can't just make var work differently because there's way too much code that depends on it relying on the old way. So now we have a button. Great. It still doesn't do anything. Also, I didn't backspace over the quotation marks. So what should it do? Anything for now. Say hi. Not close the browser. That's terrible. Let's make a function called say yeah. And we'll just say alert. Yeah. Let's run this function, see if it works. Yeah. All right. No, it's not happening today. What is wrong with my yas? Yeah. Closer. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't really matter, but it matters to me. I have a very particular way of saying yeah, and it's just not working today. Yeah. That was a little better. I'll just play the button. I'll just push the button. I have a yeah button. I'll show you later. Okay. So it works. It does a thing. Great. But I want it to happen when I push the button. What do I do? I'm hearing a lot of on-click. So elements have a variety of events that you can listen to. What we're trying to do now is establishing this part. We know what we want to happen when the event occurs, but we haven't identified what the event is. So there are a variety of properties with names like onClick, onSubmit, onMouseOver, onMouseOut, etc. OnMouseEnter, onMouseLeave, all kinds of stuff. One of them is onClick. So that is a property, and you need to set that property to the function that you want to run when the event occurs. You're answering the question, when what happens, do what? When what happens, click on the button. And what should happen? Say yeah. Tell me, do I put open close parens here? Ooh, there it goes. Yeah. I didn't click the button yet, did I? So what did I just set the onClick property to? What's on the right side of the equal side? A function call, which means what did I set it to? The return value of say yeah, which is a whole lot of nothing. So that's not going to work. The button isn't going to do a dang thing. I just set onClick to undefined because I actually called say yeah right there on line 7 and set onClick to the return value, which is nothing. What if I did something crazy like this? Inside this function, I say return some anonymous function. Yeah. I know. Yeah. And this says, it's going to do this. Okay, let's comment this out. Okay. So now my function has a return value. Okay, it says yeah when I first load the page. When I click the button, nope. That's right, the Pope of Nope is in town, folks. So if this happened to return a function, then it would be that function. But that's a really weird way to do this. What we want to happen is this. we set onClick to the function itself. We're not the ones calling say yeah. We don't put the open close parentheses there. We're just assigning the function itself, which we're treating just like any other variable because functions are just like any other variable. They're first-class citizens here. We can pass them around as arguments to other functions. We can return them from functions, and we can do things like assign properties to them. Totally works. Could I do this? Const say nope equals say yeah, and then call say nope. Can I do that? Yeah. That's right. We can do that. Cool. Now the button does something. I think. I haven't actually tested it, have I? Yeah. All right. Cool. But that's not very exciting yet. So we said click me. The stuff that comes between the opening and closing tag. That's the content of the element. How can we grab that? How can we change it? How can we change it with JavaScript? Anybody know? We already have the button. Yeah. There is something like that. It's a property, not a function, that we can use. Inner HTML does a thing kind of like that. Let's see. What is... I'll put it in here. Alert button dot inner HTML. Click the button, and I see click me. Yeah, that works. If I say click me, emphasis, now it's in italics down here, and I click the button. Now it says click angle bracket em, angle bracket me, angle bracket slash em, angle bracket. So that gets the actual HTML that's in there. There is a way to just get the text. And that is text content. There's also a non-standard one called inner text, but that is non-standard. It doesn't work in every browser. Text content works everywhere. And that says just click me. So now the question is, can we change it using that same property? So instead of alerting it, let's say button.textContent equals clicked Heck yeah, it works. Fresh. Change back. Woo! Totally does the thing. So we can actually change it that way. Okay, Paige. You can start letting me edit again. All right, I'll do it this way. Fine. I don't care. Can I still edit? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we can actually change the text content that way. Now I just used this button variable inside this function, and it was declared out here. I can do that because functions in JavaScript are an example of the computer science thing called a lambda or a closure. Anybody know what closures are? All functions in JavaScript are closures. And that means they enclose their surrounding scope. So wherever a function is declared, it gets access to all the variables that were declared immediately outside it, if applicable. So I can get to button from in here. What about if I say let x equals 4 inside here, or const, whatever. And I say, let's make sure we actually run say yeah. And then that way line 5 has actually run. Then could I say alert x I see nothing happening. X is undefined there. So say yeah inherits the variables from its surrounding scope, but not vice versa. X is local to say yeah. So every time you have a new function, it creates a new variable scope. And this is true even if you use var. This doesn't work either. What about this? What if I say, if true, const x equals 7. And then I say alert x. Nothing's happening. What if I say var x equals 7? 7. This is the difference between var and const and let. With var, not every block creates a new variable scope. Functions do, but only functions. Ifs do not do it. For loops do not do it. It doesn't happen every time you see curly braces. With let and const, you have lexical scoping like most other languages that we deal with on a regular basis. And every new block, every time you see curly braces, except for object literals, it creates a new variable scope. Yeah.
So it's like for loops, so we do like let I equals 2, so like var.
Yeah. Because you don't need I to continue to exist afterward. Yep. Now, if you did want it to exist afterward, then I would recommend setting I before the loop. Then this will use the same I. So just like I could say button here, and it's not going to create a new variable called button. Now here's a weird one. Oops, I got rid of my onClick. Suppose inside say yeah, I say x equals 9 without var or let or const. And down here I run say yeah so that line 5 runs, and then I say console log. Now if you're, alert, remember this example with the function, this scoped it to that function even with var. So alerting it didn't work. This time it works. If you don't declare a variable with any of those keywords, JavaScript will still create a variable and it will make a global variable. This is unfortunate, and you can add some tools to your workflow so that it alerts you anytime you try to do this, because it leads to unexpected behavior more often than not. For example, suppose I have a super hard to spell variable name or something. It's like const, or let's use let. Let's use something we could redefine. Let Palazzo equals Dana. That's her name. And then later, I'm like, okay, now Palazzo equals Dana still. Yes, I did. So what just happened? What we wish would happen is it said, wait a minute, Palazzo with an O, that's not a thing. Bad variable name. Nope. JavaScript's like, okay, you want a brand new global variable that is a misspelled version of one of your other variables. Super inconvenient. That's how JavaScript works. That's how it's always going to work because there's too much old code that depends on this. But we can use some settings in our editor and stuff that at least calls our attention to when we do this thing. And we will do that. So that's what happens. It creates a new global variable with that name. Kind of unfortunate, but that's what happens. So what's another way besides onClick? I don't like onClick. I'll tell you why I don't like onClick. I could then say button.onClick equals, I'm going to make it a little anonymous function right here in line. You can totally do that. Just don't give the function a name. Totally allowed. Just put it right on the right side of the equal sign. Never to be seen or heard from again. Set onClick equal to alert, or button text content. No, let's do the alert. Alert, nope. Now what's going to happen when I click the button? Will it change the text and alert nope? No, it just said nope. So the other thing didn't happen because we reassigned the property. We just blew away anything else that was supposed to happen. Sometimes I want more than one thing to happen. How else can we do it? Anybody know another way? Oh, event listener. Fancy. I like the sound of that. We're just going to tell JavaScript to listen. Listen for what? Whatever event. And then what does it do when it hears that? Whatever we tell it. Yeah. Add event listener. Good times. So, every element has a method called add event listener. So we need to tell it these two things. Add event listener predictably takes two arguments. The event to listen for and the thing to do when responding to the event. So add event listener. First argument, click. Second argument, the function. And remember, don't call the function. Don't put open close parens here, or you're going to add the event listener and say, hey, when you click, do undefined. Because that's the return value of say, yeah. It must be the function itself. Does it still work? Yeah, it changed. Hot diggity. Oops. Totally works. And this is better. We can stack event listeners. This is the modern way to do it. Questions? Pretty good stuff. So, okay, suppose we've got a big heading on the page. H1. JavaScript. Yeah. And when we click the button, we want that to change. Oh, man. How do we do it? I don't have a variable with the H1 yet. How could I get one? I bet I can't. I'm only allowed one variable per page. No, not allowed one variable per page. What do I do? What do I do? Help me out. What do I start typing? Yeah, what do I start typing, Eric?
Query selector, put in like header instead of button.
There's an idea. Just query selector? Document dot, yep. Document dot query selector. I'm going to save it to a variable. Const heading. What do I put in here? H1. H1. Indeed. Then I could say heading equals I less than 3 JavaScript. Ah, shucks. What'd I do? I said heading equals. I just reassigned it. That's not allowed. What I meant was heading dot text content equals. Click. Yep. It worked. So now we click a button and we change an H1. We have a lot of power in our hands now, folks. We can do anything. Questions about any of this stuff before we move on? All right. You ready to make a real project?